Hello, it's good to be back on my channel once more, because I like to do these videos maybe every 2 weeks or so. One of the things is that I'd like to know, or at least I'd like to think that I have something new to offer, so you're not always getting the same information every week. My last video was quite successful. The video about Albert Speer, I did go on to other subjects, but the Albert Speer and his mysterious death and the mistress that he was with, that nobody knows who that mistress is, you know. So if you've not seen that video, I recommend that you do. And also I'd recommend that you go on to see Mark Felton's video, because that's how I got the inspiration to do my own. Because him dying, or him having a heart attack in London and staying at or being pronounced dead at St Mary's Hospital in Paddington in London at the time does mean something to me, because I was there as a child. I was a patient as a child, a very young child at St Mary's Hospital. So anyway, this video is about some books that I've bought, because I always try and show something new, and how expensive these books are. So if you're really dedicated in a hobby like mine, my hobby is Berlin. I have this fascination for Berlin. If you've watched some of my other videos, you'll know that I've mentioned the fact that I wanted to be a tour guide in Berlin, and so what I tend to do is find out as much as I can from many different points of view and many different angles, and it's always to try and find a book that I don't have in this of a particular subject of Berlin society. So say for example, I have here Katja Hoyer's book. Is called Beyond the Wall. Now this book is like for the everyday reader, because you could find this book in Waterstones. I'm sure you could find this in Barnes and Noble. You'll find it in Falls in London, and you know, if you was to type in Berlin, you'll find it on Amazon. This has been published by Penguin, and I know there are a lot of readers that will just read Penguin books. I'll have a great big collection of Penguin books, so she can't really go wrong, because if you've got that logo there on the book, that guarantees that this book will be found in most bookshops and second-hand bookshops, and on library shelves, and at some point you'll find these books in charity shops as well. Whereas this book, you won't. This is East German Intellectuals and the Unification of Germany by Dan Bedwoods. Bedwoods? Just let me see that, because my eyesight, excuse me about this. Yeah, Dan Bednarz. Dan Bednarz. Now, this book I bought as a result of a podcast that I heard. It's on neutrality studies, so if you ever choose to listen to the interview with this particular author, I recommend that you do, because it was as a result of my listening to this gentleman on that podcast did I decide to buy this book. Whereas with this one, Katja Hoyer, she's everywhere. I mean, if you typed in Katja Hoyer on YouTube, or you Googled it, she would come up multiple times. So she really is a darling for the mainstream media. I say that because it's got quotes from different newspapers like the Sunday Times, the Daily Telegraph, the Spectator, the Observer and the Times. And I'm sure in the Guardian as well, and there's a picture of her there. I'm sure you'd recognise her if you're into German history. Whereas this doesn't have that. this it says here there's one like Alice Littlefield, professor of anthropology, Central Michigan University, USA, and then that's it. This is a print-on-demand book, and I paid a mouth-watering £65.88 for this book. I mean, it's an obscene amount of money. I was planning on buying this book, a hardback cover, for £72, because that's the price that I saw it go for, £72, and I had every intention of buying it. And then when I went to go and buy it, they jacked up the price to £84.99, and I said no. I said that you've hit my limit. I said no, that I can't do. They wanted £71 if I wanted a Kindle version. I again said no. I thought I'd rather have a printed version, so I opted for the paperback at £65.88. And when I got the book, I was really underwhelmed. I was not impressed at all. Having to spend all that money for a book like this. But what sold it for me, what inspired me to buy it, was that interview on that podcast on neutrality studies with the author, because he started to talk about something that I'd never come across before, and it was basically those that are in the universities, those that are scholars and professors and people like that from East Germany, who were speaking to him 6 weeks before the fall of the wall, and then after the wall, which they call the turn. They just call it the turn. It's where everything changed, and it was like how the rug was pulled from under them, and all their academies, all those universities were all suddenly shut down, and I would also have to say factories and places where on one day everything was normal and fine, and you found that you had a job to go to, and then the next day you see that factory or that university or that place where they once worked was closed, and then there'll be a little sign on the door saying that the facility has now been taken over, and it really showed how the power of the West German system, a political system, had encroached upon the East German policies and the political system and its society and its culture and everything, and flipped it and turned it on its head. And how disconcerting that must be for those that have lived in that Marxist, Stalinist, beg your pardon, I misspoke, social system, and how difficult that must be when you realise that the old system that you're used to has suddenly changed into the new one. And that's why I say that the reunification of East and West wasn't as you'd think it was, and how it's portrayed in the media. It was really how West Germany took over East Germany and made that part of West Germany, if that makes any sense, and turned it into a sort of a greater Germany. That's the only way I can explain it, and hence why I decided to buy this book. Now with this one, it's slightly different. Whereas with this book, it's more for the general reader, and I'm not saying that this book is better than this one. What I am saying is that this is more, I suspect, a more sanitized version, because she's written her book more for the general reader, and in the hope that Penguin can sell more books. And of course it says here international bestseller, so it really is about selling lots and lots of books. whereas this one doesn't quite have the same pull as the Katja Hoyer book has. This book is more aimed for the other scholars, you know, and people that are studying German history and having to write a dissertation. But sometimes you've got to put your money where your mouth is, and you know, you have to make a buying decision, and the buying decision isn't always easy. I have another book here. This is the Ulrike Meinhof and West German Terrorism by Sarah Colvin. Again, I was inspired by the podcast that I heard, and she was talking to Richard Huffman. And Richard Huffman, in my eyes, is perhaps one of those experts on the Baader-Meinhof gang, more than anybody else that I know of, put it that way. And at the end of the podcast, I remember him saying, I think Sarah Colvin knows more about the Baader-Meinhof gang than I do, hence why I bought this book. Now, when I bought this book, again, it was bittersweet because of the amount of money I had to pay for it. I remember I saw it at £44 and I was hesitant of buying it at that price. Then when I looked to buy it again, or at least when I looked and I saw that the price had jumped from 44 to like 65, and again I'd missed it. I'd missed out on that, on buying it at that price, and then it jumped up again at 72. So I knew how valuable this book was becoming, simply because of the opportunities I had of buying it at a lower price, and I missed out on them. So when you see something at a price, even though it is expensive, you know, it's always best to jump on it before somebody else does. Otherwise, you're going to end up spending more money. And sometimes, the other thing I discovered with expensive books such as this one and this one is how information becomes either sensitive or it can become hidden. That is to say that because of the amount of money that it costs to buy a book such as this, you're kind of censoring yourself in a sense, because you don't want to spend that money. It's almost like it's too much to spend, and therefore the information that the book has, you'll never get to see it, you'll never get to read it, you'll never get to study it, and that information can be priceless, hence why you're paying that amount of money for it. There's this guy called Vince Palomaro, who's like this expert on the Secret Service of the United States, and these Secret Servicemen are those people that protect the president. Now, his insight and his knowledge is quite vast because of the amount of time that he's been studying the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and also the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan, and on what these Secret Service men did. So my point is this: before the internet, or when the internet was in its infancy, he would have to spend lots of money on old newspapers, articles, and photographs, because there wasn't the internet that we recognise today, where you can look for this information on the internet. In those days, everything was analogue, and therefore, say for example, there was these photographs that he had of John F. Kennedy with the Secret Service men, because it was the Secret Service men that he was focusing on, and it was like over $112. So it's almost like, oh, that's a lot just to pay for some photographs, and yet he was forced to do it, and he was obliged to do it simply because he wanted to get that information that he saw in those photos. And I'm similar in the sense that I see it the same way, where I make a buying decision, as hard as it is, because I mean it does hurt when you sort of spend that kind of money, but once you have the book in your hands, and once you've read it and studied it and taken notes about it, you realise how valuable that information is. So this book is The East German Intellectuals and the Unification of Germany by Dan Bednarz, and this one is the Katja Hoyer, who herself is an East German. She was born in East Germany. Beyond the Wall, East Germany, from 1949 to 1990. So it's quite vast overview of what East German society was once like. But it has a different perspective on East Germany, and this one's more focused on the intellectual side of East German society. I have this book here, again on Albert Speer. Now, in my last video I talked about Albert Speer, and I'm glad to be talking about this book because the other book by Kitty Sereny is a hardback, and to hold it up is very, it gets tiring. So I'm glad to say that I've got his book on the inside of the Third Reich now. Albert Speer is a very, very interesting person to study, simply because he was so close to Hitler. He was probably the closest person to Adolf Hitler than anybody else was. And in order to understand Hitler, you're better off trying to understand Albert Speer, because it's through Albert Speer that you get to understand Hitler. So, why am I holding up this book? The reason being is because how history is being portrayed. Now, Albert Speer is a very, very articulate and intelligent man. And for those 20 years that he was in Spandau, he was scheming, he was plotting, he was planning of what he was going to do after he was freed from Spandau. Now, he wasn't released until he did his full term, whereas a lot of the other Nazi criminals were released before their term ended, so they got off earlier than Albert Speer did, and Albert Speer ended up doing the full 20 years. In fact, he did actually 21 years. So when he got out, he knew exactly what he was doing, and what he was doing was effectively whitewashing history, or his participation in the history, his participation in the Third Reich. Hence why he wrote this book. Hence why he was always doing those interviews. Hence why they called him the good Nazi. He wasn't a good Nazi. He was as bad as all the other ones were, except he was able to put a good spin on it, because he was intellectual. He was like, you'd consider him as one of the elites. He's very articulate, well-spoken, immaculately dressed, everything you'd expect of somebody who comes from a good background and went to a really good school and who's clearly highly intelligent. Why I mention him is because how he actually distorts history. He's giving you his version of how you see it through his lens. That's to say, he's filtered it. He's already taken out all the bad stuff, spun it in such a way that it makes him look more in a positive light. So I would recommend, if you're looking to get into Nazi history, into World War II history, that you keep that in the back of your mind, because it can skew you a bit. It's a bit like, say, reading a book by David Irving. So he has a bias towards the German perspective, the German point of view. So you would be well versed to read other books written by other scholars and other historians from that period, not just from his book. And that, the same it goes for Albert Speer, and not just Albert Speer, but a lot of other Nazis. When they wrote their memoirs, they're filtering their own memoirs. They're telling you, because of how bad the regime was, and what the Nazis did to the Jews, and not just the Jews, but to all the other prisoners that they had held in the concentration camps. They want to move away from it, said it's nothing to do with me. And I think one of those that were very successful in doing this, it's called Persil, which is the washing powder. Rein means clean, so it's to kind of denazify yourself in the eyes of everybody else, you know, to overcome the misdeeds of what the Nazi regime did during World War II. That's basically what it is. So you have to take books like Albert Speer's and many others who wrote their memoirs with a grain of salt, and then you really have to look at the historians that go into that archive in order for you to read directly from the archive the files, the documents, diaries, of course, letters, and interviewing those people that will give you the truth. Say, for example, I have another one here, the commandant of Auschwitz, Rudolf Höss. When he appeared at Nuremberg, he said it as he saw it. I mean, he knew exactly, he was the commandant of Auschwitz, and he said it. He gave them both barrels. He told it exactly as it was. There was no sugarcoating anything. And those that were in the dock couldn't hide. And a lot of, there were some of them that were actually crying because they actually could see what the Nazi regime was up to in a lot of the camps in and around Germany during World War II. So it's a very, very, very important point to make if you're into history, is to try and get it, and how difficult it is, because you've got to try and separate the truth from the myth. You know, you've got to try and extract the truth, and newspapers are notorious for this, because they will write it and skew things in a certain way, and yet there is truth amongst the narrative. So you've got to try and extract that in order for you to actually get to the truth, and not just get to the truth, but once you have the truth, is to actually understand what it is that you're studying and what you're looking for. So the value of the questions that you ask yourself is very, very important. Here's another book. This is the last one, and I think I've showed this one before. This says the Berlin Republic, German Unification and Decades of Changes, edited by Winard Gellner and John D. Robertson. Now, I bought this book because it's not just a question of the Berlin Wall coming down and the consequences of the Berlin Wall coming down. It's what happened afterwards as a result of the Berlin Wall coming down. And I believe it's for the country to settle, to get back to normality, or a kind of normality, because I still believe that the remnants of East Germany and West Germany is still there. I don't think that will ever leave. In fact, I think that will remain. But this is as a consequence of what happened after the fall of the Berlin Wall. But then again, I might only get a certain perspective. So that is to say that those, like, from scholars that from the outside looking in, and those that are from the inside kind of looking, examining themselves, kind of thing. And are you getting a bias? Are you getting a narrative? Or are you really getting the truth? It's very difficult to determine, because I simply don't know enough in order for me to answer that question. So, but this would be a good place to start, because this is written by scholars, and each scholar writes a particular chapter. So you've got maybe, say, 10 chapters in the book, and each scholar writes his own chapter. So you'll get 10 different perspectives, and then you get 10 different points of views and 10 different subjects, but they're all leading to the same goal, if that makes any sense. So that pretty much concludes my video. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. And because I've noticed that I've lost some subscriptions, so if you can actually check that you are subscribed, I'd be most grateful if you can. The other thing is, I wanted at the end of the video to actually show some gin, but unfortunately I forgot. I was meaning to bring some gin and I never got around to bringing some gin. Damn. But I'll remember to bring some gin the next time. You know, it's just a little bonus, it's just a little something at the end of the videos, just to sort of make it more fun and lighten up the video a little bit. So anyway, alles Gute, auf Wiedersehen und bitte fall nicht nieder.